What if you could have an appreciation of the function of your legacy in order to share it with others? It's my pleasure to introduce you to Douglas Miller on this Friday's Designing Your Legacy podcast. He joins us today from Oklahoma. Welcome, Douglas.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. So tell me a little bit about the world of heritage management.
Well, the professionalism of managing heritage is it's a relatively new field, and it was the term heritage management actually belongs to the History Factory, which is a large corporate entity that does something similar to what we do, but they do it for larger corporations, Fortune 500s and so forth, whereas our specialty is in family businesses. But essentially, the idea is that what we like to say is that your heritage is your most unique value. And there is both a monetary value to using your heritage for promoting your business, but there's a tremendous value on the human capital side for family businesses, both within the family itself, but then also how you build a good culture around your business. And using heritage for that requires that you know your heritage and that it's accessible and that you have a strategy in place for sharing it. And so all of those things taken together would be the field of heritage management.
Yes, and I know that you have worked with some very influential families, maybe even dynastic families that will go back 50 years in being able to separate the richness of the family story stories from the business stories, and to be able to understand those distinctions. And we'll get into genealogy in a moment and the DNA and pulling all of these different elements together. But I thought maybe I will just also ask you to provide a little bit of background for the listeners, because I forgot to ask that as an icebreaker. I think you were kind of an ad man, or kind of what's the backstory?
Yeah, so I by trade, I'm actually a graphic designer, which is really unusual for the heritage field. So I had a position as an associate creative director at a large multinational ad agency. And I ended up there because that's where designers go to make a living. And it's not necessarily what my ambitions or passions would be. So, I just didn't find fulfillment in the work. And then I had an opportunity to work on a magazine project that was a little outside the norm for the agency. So the creative department didn't necessarily know how to handle it, but I was like, I'm looking for something new. So let me try it. And so one of the features that they gave me was this center spread. It was a history pieces. And so we tell the story and we design the pieces. And I'm using all of those same skill set that I have for marketing and communications, but it's focused on heritage. So this magazine goes out, and lo and behold, we get letters back, that have these deeply personal stories about, the relationship between these items that we're sharing, and people's lives and so forth. And I was so touched by that because, as I like to say, no one ever sent me a letter about my thrifty car rental billboard or my Brunswick bowling ball ad. So that was 20 years ago, and I left the agency and I started Mullerhaus Legacy. And our initial focus was really on book design, and there's a lot of opportunities for history in that. But as we learned how to do these, large, elaborate, beautiful books, we were confronted over and over again by additional needs that our clients had. You can't really go to somebody and say, you should hire us to do a book, and then put all of the work on them to give me the stuff to do the book. So whether we're doing our archive services, our genealogy, our business research, our writing, interviews, videos, all the things that we do now, I built the business by responding to the needs of our clients.
Very cool, very cool. So your website says your history drives results. Your heritage drives or builds culture, and your legacy preserves success. Let me do that one more time so I can get it correct. Your history
Okay.
drives results, your heritage builds culture, and your legacy preserves success. So, why is it important to capture the family stories?
So, specifically for a family business, um, you know, okay, so one of the key differences that we experience from working for family owned business versus publicly traded business or non family business is that the the effort that goes into the enterprise means more than just the money. And it's not to say that the profit isn't a critical element for all businesses. Family business is just the same. But with family businesses, it's a personal investment. It means something more to the family. So when you're looking at that bottom line, it represents years of sacrifices. It can represent, missed uh, baseball games or missed family uh, vacations, or you really feel the sacrifice of what it takes to build a business. And when you're doing it with the family has a better understanding for those sacrifices than if dad or mom just goes off to this mysterious place where they work and they come back, and the children only know that they weren't there. In a family business, there's a much broader appreciation. So a family, also like a business, needs to have a brand. And traditionally, the brand of a family was really the heritage of the family that was handed down over the years. And we don't so much think about our family relationships in that way anymore, because the modern culture is so much more wrapped up in the individual identity. And, I'm doing my thing and this is my world. And we're less dependent on family in that way. And heritage has been a casualty of that view. But you also see a lot of very, very disconnected younger people today that need the perspective of heritage to know where they fit into history, and what's the larger calling of their life, and how did they get here, and how do all the pieces fit together. So in a business situation, history is important to any business, but it's uniquely important in a family business.
Yes. There was also a really good statistic on your website that read something along the lines of 64% of high achieving families pass on little to nothing about the history of their success. And I thought that is interesting. And one of the things I shared with you was my family's background, at least on my paternal side. But I've also shared
Mm-hmm.
in prior podcasts that during COVID, the pandemic, because I had the time, I interviewed both my parents for about 10 or 11 hours. And all of a sudden, these stories came out. And I was like, well, why didn't you tell me about this earlier? I would have been
Mm-hmm.
nicer as a teenager.
Yeah.
If I had only known, some of what they had gone through in the first 10 years of their life, or just the background on things. Like, for example, my dad's side of the family, they're from New England. And back in the turn of the century, there were these water pitchers in the bedroom. And of course there were, because it was different back then. But to see the
Yeah.
picture, I wouldn't have known it unless somebody provided the cliff notes, unless they provided the explanation, the context, the background. And then it becomes real of why are all these people dressed in Brooks Brothers and, immaculate in their fashion and their lifestyle, and all of those moving pieces, or even them having lived through the Great Depression, while my dad only had us drink small glasses of orange juice because there's apparently
Mm-hmm.
a shortage of orange juice, even if it's the 80s or the 90s. Obviously, there's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
anymore, but yeah, yeah. One of the things,
I watched you. I watched you talking about the small glasses of orange juice, and
oh,
I thought, oh, there's how many examples of that do I have in my family history too, where you can relate
oh,
those things.
it's huge. It's huge, and people hold on to those things. And a lot of times, people don't know the origin of why those traditions or rituals get passed on. That there's never allowed large glasses of orange juice are never allowed ever.
Yeah.
So, one
Yeah.
of the things you also mentioned is sometimes it allows the family to function with new awareness. or perhaps have them understand what the family represents. Would you say more?
Yeah. So um, I'm thinking of one family that we work with specifically that their their heritage started in Oklahoma through a land run. They were one of the land run families, and a common thing that is true about most land run families is because they were participating in the land run because they were just sort of out of options for any easier way to acquire opportunity. And they have they've been very, very successful in the restaurant industry, which opened them up to various other endeavors. And so, if you look at them on the future, or if you look at them at the current, and they're thinking about what they're going to explain to the future, it would all be about the experiences of being successful in this restaurant industry, or the things that define the family today. But when we go back and look at their roots, you have a broader understanding for how much was sacrificed to get them to the point where they had a launching pad for modern commerce. So for that family, they have invested a tremendous amount in Western art and art museums and cultural preservation, and they donate to causes that acknowledge the needs that they appreciate because of their roots. And so that's kind of an example of where the character of the family today is still based on events that occurred more than 100 years ago. But without those events, the family never would have survived. And it does color the attitudes of the younger people in the family if they have that appreciation of the sacrifices that came before them.
Yeah, it's a big deal. People sometimes don't understand the origin or the emotion around it because there can be big feelings around certain decisions and why they're made. Out of curiosity, your company is called Mullerhaus Legacy. Is there significance to the word Mullerhaus?
Yeah. So this is actually it's a great story, but it's steeped in irony. So you'll have to share the ironic humor in this. So when I left the agency 20 years ago, it was still the early days of the internet. So before I started the agency, I did a lot of freelance work with the name Mullerhaus because my last name is Miller, and so the Mullerhaus. And then along comes the Google, and I find out that there's the Mullerhaus is everywhere. So it really didn't work from a internet perspective or SEO or anything like that. So I thought, well, I need something that's a little bit more interesting, unusual. And so I'd always heard that the original Germanic form of my name is Muller. So I went with Mullerhaus. But that was before I got into so much of the genealogy and research. And so since then, I've obviously done a tremendous amount of genealogy work on my side of the family, and I can find no evidence that our German name was, anything other than Miller. So I can't find that it wasn't. I can't find that it was. But I thought about that, and I thought, man, that's kind of a terrible name for a company that does all of this research. But then the more I thought about it, I actually kind of like the irony in that, because one of the things our clients always bring us are the question marks. I've always heard that, or Grandpa used to tell me, or I think, or I assume, or I believe. And those are the type of things that we actually help our clients with. So for me to have that same struggle that our clients had, it seems somehow appropriate.
Oh, I think it's wonderful. And I think the idea of Mullerhaus, it almost makes me wonder if it's like like you had said, the connection back to Germany, German roots, and America oftentimes is a melting pot. And unless we make the effort, we oftentimes don't reach back to understand those roots and the
Hmm.
culture and the connections and all of that. So one of the things, speaking of surprises, was I didn't realize that 90% of all businesses, and I wonder if this is in the United States as well as abroad, are family businesses, and that many public companies are either controlled by a dynastic family, thus a family, or government.
Yeah. Yeah. And, when you stop and think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense because owning a business is, um, it takes up so much of your life that it seems sooner or later, once you start a business, you're going to have to start pulling in the people that you can trust the most and the most quickly, which they tend to be family members. So where you really see those numbers dramatically drop is when you get into the generational shift. So, it's not unusual to start a family business. It's unusual to pass a family business down to the second generation, and the third generation is very unusual. By the time you get to the fourth generation, you're talking about a very small handful of businesses that make it that far. And we have found that, um, you know, today we do a much better job of succession and how do we plan these things and giving the choice to younger generations. Do you want the business? How can we help you prepare for the business? And so many of our multi-generational stories, the businesses were just forced on the younger generations, the next generation down. Uh, we have one story I think of in particular where this second generation owner he wanted nothing more than to escape to college to get away from the family business that he was made to work in, since he was a teenager. And he's 20 years old, starts his first semester at college, and his father calls him back and just tells him, I can't do this anymore. You have to take the business. And that was it. And um, that's the way it was done for so many years. And it's really quite remarkable what a family could achieve with a business that was forced on a younger generation. People, they used to be much more duty focused. This is my duty. This is my responsibility. This may not be what I want in life, but there's a responsibility that's bigger than me. And, can't say that's a better way to live, but there is a lot of nobility in those stories that you see, is that, there were so many people depending on this business that it was just my responsibility. I just had to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because speaking of duty, that next generation could say, "Oh yeah, please bring your hopes and dreams to my doorstep."
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, I'll tell you what amazing thing to think about that is that uh, one of the things that makes that generational transition so difficult is because with a successful business, when you get to the third or the fourth generation, the wealth that's generated by the business gives those kids more options. They actually have an option to come in and say, no, I want to do something else. I've got this, I've got my education, I've got my opportunity. Um, I haven't had to move boxes or mow lawns or stock shelves, since I was 12. So I'm in a position now where I have some options. But you go back to some of the businesses that were formed a century ago, and those kids, they, just financially, the family just didn't have a choice. Kids were, kids were labor. This is also when you had, families that could be, 6, 7, 8. My great grandparents, they had 13 kids, and that just wasn't that unusual. So, that's one of the things that, the wealth can make generational transition difficult.
well, I think it's interesting. And before I move on to the next question, I think what you're pointing to is survival. And many times
Yeah.
families would have many children because it was a different time. And I think that one of the things you're also bringing up is how humans like to conserve calories. And so if they don't have to stock those shelves, and if they do have more options, they're probably a little bit less hungry for the business because they haven't had to starve.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So completely
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
frame of mind.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will tell you one other interesting story. And I do have to say, um, obviously, the work that we do, privacy is incredibly important. So, I love telling my stories, but I always have to leave specific names out of it, so um, hope you understand. But um, we did uh, a centennial project for one of our oil and gas industry leaders here in Tulsa. And there's a very dramatic story where the transition from from the first to the second generation was, you know, um, the young man was told, well, you've got to take over the company. But the young man was hesitant to get involved because he's like, dad's not ready to let go. And, you know, he's a difficult personality, and I don't want to work for my dad for the next, 20, 30 years until he decides that he's going to retire. So he was like, no, I'm not going to do this. But in the meantime, he met a beautiful movie star in Hollywood, and they fell in love. And when he told her, I'm leaving the oil industry and I want to become a school teacher, she said, no, I'm not giving up my acting career and sacrificing everything that I would need to sacrifice, move to Oklahoma. I'm not going to do that to be married to a school teacher. So he was like, well, okay, I guess it's the oil industry. But talking about the small glasses of orange juice, that ethic then moved forward. So that family exited the company in the third generation because that ethic of, the second generation was not going to force it on the third generation, and the third generation was not going to force it on the fourth generation. And so there wasn't interest in the fourth generation, so they exited. But that, is an example of where that decision came from, that you don't just force companies on people.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting because it's how the story evolves through the
Yeah.
years, through the generations, through the times. So, what happens when you get to bring forth the hopes and dreams of a family?
Oh my goodness. It's different for every family because every family has its own unique set of hopes and dreams. But one thing that I do like to say, I say it kind of in jest, but not really. I say that in the process of doing our project, at some point, I want somebody to cry. And that is really, happens virtually every project at some point. Sometimes it's quite often, sometimes it's rare, but it usually happens. And going back to the difference between what we do today and what I was doing at the ad agency, when I can emotionally touch somebody and bring them to tears, it's an indication that what I'm doing is of value in a way that you don't often experience in the world of business. I want to touch people personally, and I want there to be real change within families and broader appreciation and understanding. And so, sometimes what you see is a incredible sense of satisfaction and comfort in the older generations that will actually bring death. If you give a member of the older generation the room to say everything that they need to say, unload it all, and put a period at the end of their life, they just check out because it's, my work here is done. I've said what I need to say. I've done everything I need to say. And then for younger generations, you also have the thing where there's this incredible enthusiasm. Like, I didn't know. Um, I didn't know that I had that in me, or that character ran through my blood. Here I am. I'm at school freaking out because I've got to get it. I've got to get a certain percentage on this test, and it seems like that's all that matters. And then I find out that that my ancestor starved to death on the plains because their because their mail didn't come, or their supply train didn't come, and different things like that. My someone finds out that my grandmother nearly died twice waiting for health care that just wasn't available, but somehow she survived. And the only reason I'm here to worry about my stupid percentage on my test is because, she barely survived. And, it's biologically, we're the same creatures. It's not like people back then were superior to us, or they were smarter, or they were stronger. They just had so much more weight put on their shoulders, and they would rise to occasions that we just can't even imagine. So you go to you go to somebody who is really struggling with things that are, as we say, first world problems, and you convince them that, that within their DNA is the ability to survive and, achieve great things. And it does make a difference.
Yes, and
It really
prevail
does.
through those tough circumstances. I can imagine also when the hopes and dreams of a family, when they can talk about those historical stories, it also transcends greed and entitlement,
Mm-hmm.
especially
Yeah.
if there is succession and I'm owed something from you, Douglas. And if that's my fixation, and then someone comes sideways into the conversation and says, "Oh, but did you know the story about what happened 4 generations ago?" Then it's like, "Oh, okay, then maybe I won't be fixated anymore on that dollar number, because
Yeah.
there's a story there of survival and transcending odds when that individual didn't think they could." And
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden, I just think it brings a new depth to the human experience. Like when you talked about, if at some point, if your client can cry, that's when it's personal. That's when it hits home. That's when the glue is more than just what's on the tax returns and the balance sheets and the legal and the financial documents.
Right. Yeah. And, there's, I said, earlier, talked about the sense of responsibility and obligation and so forth. And that's something that,
Duty.
it was a duty. Yes. Yes. Um, when we, uh, when we think about the difficulties of life, there was a lot more expected of people from the perspective of duty and not so much choice. And as we have been more successful as a society, obviously the burden of duty has diminished. But the problem with that is that duty is a very important part of the human psyche. We have to be called to something bigger than ourselves, or we're miserable. We get all wrapped up in ourselves, and and it's us and Instagram, and this is what's going on with me, and all of that. And so much of the self-seeking that people are doing today, they are looking for um, a story to put themselves into, um, some broader value than just themselves sitting there getting everything they want in life.
I think
And
it's a sense of
so,
belonging, and I don't mean to interrupt.
right, it is. Yeah. Yeah. It's, you
It's
don't have a
belonging to
tree without.
something deeper and better and bigger than social media and the me culture.
Yes, absolutely. So you don't have a tree without roots. Um, and if you cut the roots off from a tree will die. Um, and it's kind of like that in our lives as humans, that we have, this innate God-given element within us that we need to understand why we're here. And it's hard to know why you're here if you don't know how you got here. And that's that's why, genealogy is a thing. And that's why, you can go all the way back as far as we can go in recorded human history. And people are always looking at their roots and generations, and every faith, every major faith in the world, tells them to pass things from one generation to the next generation. And there, I think, is the importance of sharing heritage has, it's never been less important than we make it today. And at the same time, it's never been as easy as it is today to get actual information, because information is, highly accessible today, but we're just not raised to seek it.
Yes, yes. It's interesting when I look back at when I had the conversations with both my parents for about 10 or 11 hours. I think the value of that is knowing that somebody outside in this world could not blow me off center. Because a lot of times in society, people will project an identity onto someone else. Well, I think you're like this. And it's like, well, no, I'm not. But if somebody doesn't have those roots to the tree, like you talked about, it's so easy then to just get just caught up in that wind and to lose yourself, and compared to putting up the shield and saying, okay, well, you can think that. I know who I am. Thank you.
Exactly. Yes. That's so true. Yeah. Having the confidence. So there's I wish I had the quote in front of me because I use it all the time, but there's a study that talked about how a clear understanding of family history impacts the lives of young people, and it gives them this, a sense of awareness for themselves, but it impacts their self-confidence. This is exactly what you're talking about. Their self-confidence and their view of the world, and
it fills in the empty places.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Because life is very difficult when you think of someone who they grew up in a state system or an orphanage or adopted or whatever, and they just have those, like you say, the empty places, and they want to know those things. Well, why do they want to know it? Well, because it's just part of being human. So you go back and you look at all of these desires to know ourselves better, and you start filling that information into family members, and it makes a big difference on how they function. But the interesting thing about this too is the ability to invite others into your family story. So if you're a family business and you have employees who work for you, employees love working for a high functioning family business because it gives them more purpose as well. They feel like they're not just going to work at a place where it's just about the paycheck. They're actually participating in somebody else's story. And whenever we do family history books or projects or whatever, those businesses always want employees. Like, oh, Jim has been with us for 20 years. You've got to talk to him. And I talk to Jim, and it's like you're talking to a member of the family. And it's not unusual at all. Sometimes employees have more archive material than the family members themselves, because, the family members are so busy running the business, they can actually be terrible stewards of their own heritage because they're just so busy. And, they've got other people around them that can see that, and they'll say, well, you should keep that someday. You're going to want to share that with the kids. Okay, just put it over there, whatever. So.
Yeah. Very good stuff. So your books, and they range in price, and I won't state the price on this podcast because they can reach out to you when they would like to gather some more information. But your books capture the core values, dreams, purpose, as well as aspirations. And I was curious, what else gets to be memorialized to be handed down to future generations?
Well, we want to make sure that there's context in there. So it's not just the facts. It's not just the values. It's not just all of these separate elements in there, but that's the difference between collecting data and telling a story. So we really want to use story tie all of those elements together. And those elements can include a love for place, a love for people, some specific ministry that the building or the business may be involved in. Why are we involved in that? Well, if you understand, your aunt's struggle with polio, it helps make more sense as to why, this particular community service part is so important to the company. So, one of the things that I think we do very, very differently than other companies that do custom books or genealogy is how we contextualize the information. So we hear all the time that, yes, we had this book done. They did a great job of collecting the information, but frankly, the book is virtually unreadable. It's just very, very boring. It's very rich in information, but it's kind of boring. Or another thing is that, because I come from this, from a creative perspective, it's very important that our books be beautiful and engaging. And we have a whole strategy on how when someone picks up the book, the first thing they're probably going to do is go to the back, look up their name in the index and see what you said about them. So we have to make sure we always do indexes, and then they'll go through and engage with the photography, because that's the easiest of burning, the fewest calories, as you said. And so it's really important that you have great cut lines with the photos. And then we do what are called pull quotes, where we take, the interesting tidbits out of the story and make it really big, so you can get involved. And we engineer our book so, like, the last thing we expect you to do is actually read the book. But just by browsing a book, you can get so much out of it. And that engagement is really what we're after. We want heritage to be impactful. So we design our products to be easily engaged with.
Yes, yes. And I know one of the things your website also mentioned is that heritage can also drive performance. But I think beyond the business side of this, I think that there's something to be said about the connectivity. It's what connects the human beings together, again, for more than the money. But let me bring up the silver spoon for a moment. You had mentioned in a prior podcast or conversation about understanding the cost of that silver spoon, or what is expected of the next generation. And I just want to add, before you answer this question, is expectation is very interesting, because on my mother's side of the family, she actually grew up on a farm and she has 10 siblings, and they don't take anything for granted. But on my dad's side of the family, there's what is called silent expectations. In other words, I don't have to tell you, Angie, I expect you to do well. It's unspoken.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is, I'm collecting my thoughts because there's so much that can be said about that. So the silent expectation is something that that it didn't have to be said, because it was so apparent by the lifestyle that the children saw and participated in when they grew up. Didn't have to say it. Like, if I have to tell you, if I have to tell you, you're not paying attention, type of thing. And that's, predates the world that we're in today, where there are so many distractions for kids, and they have so many different things to focus on. And this true is the same is true for employees too. You've got to be very clear on how you communicate with employees, because there are so many distractions that they're not just going to pick up what you're putting down unless you point at it and actually say it. And so the silver spoon is a natural human byproduct from low expectations. So I'm giving you a tremendous amount without making my expectations clear. And, am I giving you something that you're not earning? Quite often, you see, I'm giving it to you because I feel guilty because I wasn't around, so I'm going to give you a lot more because that's how I deal with it. And there is, you hear so much about the third generation curse, where the first generation risked everything and built everything and pulled the second generation into the drama of building the thing. And by the time you get through the second generation, you have the success and the wealth. And then the third generation has been sort of standing on the sidelines, reaping the benefits of the wealth as they've grown up. And then all of a sudden it's their time to step up. And, they weren't needed in the way the second generation was. And so they're just not prepared, and they become a victim of wealth. And, and we see that in a lot of what we do. We see drug addiction problems. We see depression. We've seen companies spiral into bankruptcy. And then, sometimes the fourth generation story is about the recovery from the lessons learned in the third generation. So there is in the trusted advisor class, the wealth managers and the family offices, and this amazing world that we live in, there's a tremendous focus on preventing that third generation crash. And heritage, I think, has to be a part of it. You can't teach people fundamental values and purpose and how to take on responsibility and hold them accountable for what's expected of them. You can't do that by managing their portfolio extremely well. You're going to have to get in there and deal with the human element of that. And if there's a pile of cash that you've benefited from and enjoyed, and then all of a sudden you're responsible for it, it's very hard to know what to do with it if you don't know how that pile of cash got there.
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting. I'm also just kind of reflecting on a couple of moments of when I was growing up, my dad would make me earn it. He would say, I'll pay for half of the bicycle or the roller skates or the thing, whatever that thing was, music lessons, voice lessons, summer camp, whatever it was. But you have to pay for the other half. Oh, it would just get my goat because I thought I was entitled to have him pay for all of it. And even, yeah, oh, it would make me so mad. But I think probably looking back, there is something to be said about earning it. Even if, let's say someone who is a child within a family can say, but you have that 5-bedroom house or you drive that Mercedes, therefore, why do I have to earn half of it? And yeah.
So I'll just, to be completely transparent, I'll tell you that last night I had a very painful experience with my son. He's 19, and his friends, they're better off than him. They have better paying jobs, and he's in school, and he's not able to keep up with them with all of the things that they want to do. And for me as a father, it's very difficult, because I know it's like, oh, I could just hand you whatever money you needed to keep up with your friends, because it hurts me to see him being left behind on things. But I also know that he's got some work to do on developing his responsibility. And, you got paid 2 weeks ago, and why is all of your money gone? Well, let's look at how you spent that. And, you didn't spend it wisely. To which he comes back and he says, well, I'm just hanging out with the guys. I'm just doing what they want to do. And they're not spending wisely either. And their parents just give them money. It's like, well, that's, their parents aren't historians. So, I know my mother grew up poor, very poor, and very abusive relationship or a very abusive family situation. And, and she, used the outhouse, didn't always have running electricity. And so when we grew up, we really managed the money, but it wasn't, with the way my mother raised us, it wasn't always because we had to. sometimes it was, but it wasn't always that way. But it was because this is the right way to go to develop the character. So how did I ultimately deal with the struggle that my son was having? We went to the grocery store, and and I said, okay, we're going to go shopping, and here's your budget, and you've got you can go, you've got $30. You could go buy 3 meals at a fast food restaurant for your $30, or you can buy groceries for a week and a half, maybe, if you do it right. So that's what we're going to focus on. And so in me telling him that, I'm also including stories of my kids call my grandmother Grampy, which is a whole funny story. So I'm always like, this is this would be considered a luxury for the way that Grampy raised us, or this is what Grampy taught me. And when I tell him to do something because Grampy taught me that, it gives more validity to my words, because I'm not just making up a value on the spot because it's important to me. I'm actually saying that, no, this is the way it was handed down to me. And that in and of itself has value because it's backed up by wisdom and experience. And so, that's how you can use heritage to take your son shopping so he doesn't spend all of his money.
I think that's a beautiful story. And I think that the asset of your time and giving of your time is what he will remember, and filling in the places where he might feel insecure because of keeping up with the Joneses, or just that thing about status, especially as a young person. So
Yeah.
would you share a success story or two about when you've engaged with a family on a book project and it brought about more trust and connection? Because I know, like you had said, your books are designed in such a way to create a high level of engagement, whereas sometimes people are siloed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So not wanting to name names again. Well, okay. Not naming names, but I think one of my favorite examples of that is a ranch story. We love telling ranch stories. And we did one particular book in which you had a second generation rancher wanting to capture the stories of the ranch for his great grandkids. And the thing that's unique about ranch stories, cowboy stories specifically, is that it takes a unique approach to history because, as I say, this is a tremendous collection of stories, and some of them are even true. So with the cowboy storytelling is an art in and of itself. And what you're preserving is the value of the story sometimes supersedes the literal telling of history. And so you have to kind of handle them in a unique way. We do stories, we say this is as told by. And so what the grandfather really wanted to do is to teach his great grandchildren the love of ranching community. Not, they've been raised working with the cattle, and they were actually really very good at understanding the operations of the ranch and land management and the details of where things came from. But it was the love of the culture, all of the stories, the things that brought him to tears, and this, thinking about all the people that sacrificed so much, and the gales of laughter he would have, with the other cowhands sitting out working late at night, and just, the emotional experience of it that just can't be passed down through the data, the historical record, the color. And so
You have to bring the facts
together
to life.
Hmm?
You have to bring the facts to life.
Yes, exactly. So we did this book that was filled with all of these stories that the kids had never heard before. They knew about the incident. Oh yeah, I knew that Grandpa was a terrible driver, but then the actual hilarious stories that came about because Grandpa was a terrible driver and he couldn't keep his truck out of the ditch, and all of the ways that the neighbors had to come out and help him, and everybody thought he was, you know, drunk or whatever, and but no, that's just him. So that the perspective that gave the younger generation when they actually came to understand not just the facts of history, but the value of the lifestyle and how people interacted with each other, and it just made it so much more real to them. It's like you can look at all of the historical information and it can still be sort of a low resolution example of life, but then when you get into the human experience of it, there may not be as good of history, the quality of the details and everything, but it's so much more relatable, so
yeah, I think then it becomes more exciting than the Hollywood blockbuster movie. It becomes more real. It becomes like you just want more of it because it's so authentic and candid, and like you had said, it touches somebody's heart, and yeah, that emotion can blow someone away, especially when it hits that close to home regarding the unique personalities within a family. You shared that oftentimes the senior generation can have modesty concerns when it comes to sharing the story, even though I know sometimes you will focus more on G3 or some of the up and coming generations. And I thought you would take a moment to speak into this, the emotional reactions of each generation.
Yeah. So, when you have someone who, an older person who has sacrificed a lot to build a business, what they want to talk about is how much help they had along the way. Mm-hmm. Because it can be extremely difficult, and they have that historical perspective where they can really sit back and look at all of those incidents from history and say, I wouldn't have been successful if it wasn't for that one time that my father-in-law stepped in there and, pushed the neighbor around or, somebody gave me the time, and the advice that I needed just at the right time. There's always tons of examples, that the older people really appreciate. So it's very uncommon that we have an older person that is not concerned about putting themselves in the spotlight. And it can be tricky too, because you have everyone around them who are, they're saying, Dad or Grandpa, your stories are so valuable. We want to preserve those. And, what they're trying to do is save a piece of this person before they're not with them anymore. But for the old person, that modesty comes from the humility of having to fall down so many times before you were successful. And that's something that we really respect, and we really work with people, the older folks, to make sure that we are putting a project together that is their opportunity to show gratitude to everyone around them. So we had one executive who built an extremely successful company that revolutionized the entire industry that he was in. And to tell his story adequately in the space that we had to work in, we probably needed to interview, 8, maybe 10 people. But his interview list came back with 71 people on it. And so our writer loaded up with our client on his jet and went on this tour across the country interviewing these 71 people. And what that was really about was this elderly gentleman going back to those people and saying, I understand that I wouldn't have been successful if it wasn't for you. And I want your part in the story. I want you to participate in this. And so, that was, that's an example of how, like what we do all of this work, and it's like an iceberg. in our big, beautiful, wonderful books or videos or whatever we do, it's like that's just a little part that sticks out above the water, and it's this whole collection of work and the experience and you know the research, all of the things that are under the water that you don't see, but the experience is a huge part of that. And so responding to someone who has privacy, or not privacy concerns, but humility concerns, it's about getting them to understand it's not about what's on top. It's about the experience and what you tell other people about it.
Yeah, I just want to share this quick little story before we move on to the next question. It was interesting when I did go back and I chatted with both my parents for the 10 or 11 hours. My dad felt like sometimes his answers weren't enough, that he needed to go onto the internet and look up executive Q&A answers. Like like he needed executive. No, he just needed to be himself. And that was good enough. That was the gold. And then it was interesting regarding my mother's reaction, because I think a lot of times she felt overlooked throughout the years. And so for somebody to finally ask her thoughts and feelings, to finally have somebody listen to what she had to say about a variety of topics, it was like she finally, I think, felt a little bit more respected compared to just being in the background.
Yeah. So we did. If you're curious what we did with COVID, we took a big step back and did a tremendous amount of work of rebuilding. Everything from the way we market. There was not a part of the company that didn't get an overhaul. And part of what we worked on was a bunch of consumer research. So we sent a team to go talk to a bunch of the families that we had worked for and really understand what they got out of the project, what they were looking for when they engaged us, and if we met their expectations, all of those things. And that was, for me, it was a terrifying experience. Like, oh, what are they going to say? But I was overwhelmed with, talk about a rush of humility when you read their answers on these things. And you're like, oh my gosh, I did all that. It's humbling to me because the team and I gave them so much without even realizing what we were focusing on, and it helped us do it so much better in the future to know that. But my point being, there was one common theme that constantly came back. Those were two qualities: appreciation and understanding. Mm-hmm. And the older folks, they want the younger people to understand the timeline and how, the full breadth of understanding, contextualize the world and so forth. But then the appreciation was a very interesting and complicated dynamic, because you had people who are extremely humble, but yet they still wanted to be appreciated for what they achieved beyond the money. So it's not, I don't want you to appreciate the fact that, that I sacrificed and you're benefiting from the wealth, but I want you to appreciate what that means for you. What are your obligations and what are your responsibilities moving forward? So you'll see in lots of marketing that we do, that you'll constantly see the use of these terms, appreciation and understanding, coming back, because that's, ultimately what we're, those are the parts of the heart that we're trying to touch. That's where we get the tears, I think.
Yes.
And it's very common to see that in women who have supported the business in so many different ways, and they don't get that appreciation. And they can be the best storytellers, and and quite often, especially in the earlier generations, you have men that they had their head so far down in the bucket, just trying to focus on the things that needed to be focused on, that they missed the whole outside world. But the women are there, and they see the context. They would take the paycheck and make sure that all of the right things were done with the paycheck, and and that the moral obligations for the families are being met, and that the employees are well taken care of. There's so many stories uh, the about what women family members did to benefit the employees and build the culture of a company, and get those employees to stick around, because they would say, if you lose so and so, you're going to be in a tremendous amount of trouble. So we're going to go talk to them about the accident that their child just had, and that medical bill that they're worried about getting paid. And we'll do that as a family because I know how important they are to the business. And quite often the men they don't see it.
Yeah, I think that is really insightful. So let me ask you this tough question before I ask you the final question about your legacy vision. How do you deal with narcissistic family members? Because sometimes the traits of narcissism, and there is a spectrum, can be what allows someone to rise to the top, what allows them to be driven. And yet, how do you deal with a narcissistic family member?
So, interestingly enough, I have to say that we haven't experienced a lot of that. And that's not to say we haven't worked with narcissistic personalities, but heritage is instinctively about someone else, or about something else, or about, when I sit down and interview somebody talking about family stories, just by nature, I'm not talking about them. And it's very difficult for a narcissist to be in a position where they're talking about somebody else all the time, And so we hear more stories about narcissists, but we don't have to work with them one-on-one. And I honestly can't tell you if that's because those type of personalities aren't attracted to what we do, or they're filtered out of the process by the family or by the company before they get to us, because their input wouldn't be considered valuable. And certainly we said, well, what about, what about your brother John? Are we going to interview him? I said, no, he's not going to participate in this. Or, I don't think he's going to have a lot to offer, and things like that. So there's a lot of filtering. And that, I will say, is I've talked to so many consultants that deal with high net worth and ultra high net worth families, that they struggle with the narcissistic personalities because they have to be dealt with when you're talking about wealth management and succession and so forth. But I guess we're just kind of in a luxury point of view where they're just quite often those personality types aren't invited to the table.
Interesting. It's a tough question. Just wanted to bring it up because it's kind of like a pink elephant in the room sometimes. So since this is a legacy,
I mean, I'm sure our time will be coming with that, but
yeah, just wait.
yeah. And I will also say too, we're when we do any kind of a book, whether it's a family history book or a business history book, the pieces that will end up in the book will probably be 10% of the overall volume of data that's collected. Now, of course, the client gets everything. They get the rest of the iceberg, so to speak. But, people who talk about themselves or give bad input that don't really contribute to the story, it's very easy to, that'll just get filtered out in the storytelling process anyway. So.
Good to know. Since this is a legacy podcast, what does this word mean to you? What would you like your holistic legacy to be?
So for me, this gets down to, our mission. My mission is really focused on the preservation of the American dream and the value of opportunity. And I'm very focused on our culture and cultural preservation and so forth. So when I look at the unique element of the American dream, it is the idea that you have this tremendous contrast from the old world to the new world, where, if you were a miller in the old world, you were literally named based on your career, and you didn't have a choice. There wasn't opportunity to change your lot in life. And when I think about legacy, the things that we pass down are the elements that we need to keep the American dream alive. And so that means personal responsibility. That means a belief that we're not stuck in the station we're born into. It means that with freedom comes obligations to do right by our fellow man, whether it's in business, putting principle above profit, and all of those different values. So to me, legacy is about passing down values that make life worth living. And it can be the legacy of a business, it can be the legacy of an individual, legacy of a family, but it just means that every generation doesn't have the burden of inventing itself over and over again. So, yeah, it's the things we pass down, but it's, for me, it's not, it helps manage the transfer of wealth, but it's not the transfer of wealth, because, legacy is as true and valuable for someone who is wealthy and successful as it is for someone like so many members of my family that didn't have two pennies to rub together, as poor as a church mouse, as they said. But their family name meant something, and they had character, and they knew how to treat people, and those are all qualities that you don't have to be wealthy to pass down, but you have to know your history.
Oh, that's beautiful. 3 or 4 core values.
Sorry?
What would be 3 or 4 core values?
So core values, first of all, is appreciation, and generosity, hard work, so work ethic, and humility. And I think if you have work ethic, humility, generosity, and appreciation, you have those things lined up. It's very it's difficult not to achieve the things that are expected of you in life, and that can help you grow wealth. That can help you be a good steward of your wealth, and it can also help you be very happy and satisfied with the things that you achieve, regardless of wealth. So when I look at the things, the elements in the world that I see today that really, really concern me, you see a tremendous lack of humility. This is the thing that I watched a video the other day where, a lady lost her mind because she didn't get her middle seat. She was a 30-year-old woman, and she lost her mind, or she didn't get her aisle seat. She wanted a middle seat, and she ends up being carted to jail because she just couldn't believe that she wasn't going to get what she wanted. And you see so many people, feeling that they're owed something, or that they have the right to go in and steal something from a store because the store has more money than they do. And it's not about the money. It's about your character as an individual. And these are things that were human values that superseded financial position in life. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor. You just didn't steal because you don't do that. That's it's a character quality that that speaks for itself, and those are the type of things that have to be handed down. You have to be taught that from one generation to the next, because if every generation is making it up for themselves, and they say, well, I want to walk into that Quick Trip and steal that whatever because Quick Trip has all the money in the world and I don't. Why shouldn't I do it? you got to learn that from somewhere, or you've got to learn the values on that from somewhere, and those come from being passed down,
Yes.
from.
We have to wrap in a moment, but would you tell me what you would like in your hardcover coffee table book? You're in the business of creating these custom books for others. What would you like in your book?
Well, for me, it would be very difficult for me to tell my story without talking a lot about my mother's story. My mother has, she's taught me all the things that I value, and she lived that example. So I think that in my story would really start with her story, because me looking at her has given me direction on all of the things that I do. And, I want her to get the appreciation, and I want my kids to understand what she sacrificed to put me in a position where I could do something like this. And then from there, my story is really just about the stories of our clients, because it's kind of like what we do is amazing and it's fun for us. But the only thing that makes it so interesting is that I can tell you other people's stories that makes our job interesting. So that is then, what do I want to push ahead to future generations? It's where I learned the things that gave me the ability to do what I do, and the people around me that made it worth doing. And that, I think, is the legacy that I want to put forward.
Oh, I think that's beautiful. I know that as we draw to a close, I just want to take a moment to say thank you before reading my closing paragraph. I thought that you brought some real gems into our conversation. I was taking notes as we chatted, and I think that just want to kind of do a summary right now. We started with the intention for the listener of what if you could have an appreciation of the function of your legacy to share it with others. And I think that we've achieved that in our conversation today. And I think that you've brought some great points up about, preventing G3 from crashing and the guilt around some generations if they weren't there in terms of the time component. And also understanding that effort has to be put into that enterprise. It is a personal investment, the years of sacrifice and so forth. And we are wrapped up sometimes very much in individualism today that we forget the larger group, the larger family. And it does take a team to make something work, like whether you had spoken about the 71 individuals that client wanted to incorporate into their hardcover coffee table book. And I just think those are some of the brilliant key points that you brought forward. And even this idea of the sense of obligation or the burden of duty to have something bigger that we are a part of, more than just like the me culture or what I want today. I think it adds to the fun of life, the meaning of life, because somebody can be all about me, but it's sure lonely in that silo if that's all that they are, that they're all about. So thank you so much for being a guest speaker today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful. So I'm just going to read my closing paragraph. Is there a website that you would like to share, or any closing thoughts?
One closing thought that I think is very important for high net worth and ultra high net worth families, that we are dealing with people they live extremely busy lives and they spend a lot of time on the business. But one thing that I do constantly see is the value that the younger generations place in the time their parents spent away, when they understand why they were gone. And so, there's nothing more difficult for kids when the parents are just there and they don't know why. But we hear it all the time, high functioning families where people love each other, and you would never look at them and say, oh, they've got their time well managed, because they're just away a lot. But once in a family business, once the young people can contextualize what their parents were doing all those years, it really makes a big difference. And there can be a lot of healing that can happen through that.
That's brilliant. And the website is mullerhauslegacy.com?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, I'm just going to read out my closing paragraph now. So, in closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, USA, but international in those I consult. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education or preparation in the moat or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself in new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're tuning in on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, SoundCloud, etc., please like, share, and with your friends and family, and provide a comment. Let us know. Reach out to us via email or phone. Thank you so much for joining us once again this week, and thank you to Mr. Miller for speaking into your legacy.
All right.